All right. So this particular presentation is not really a presentation, it's more of a discussion. Excuse me. At last year's Lang.net, there was a lot of discussion around various languages that people were sort of playing with and sort of experimenting with and producing, and most of them were in more or less a finished state of state. And so I thought to myself it would be kind of fun, just as kind of a why not, what the heck, to look at a particular language that had sort of been running around in the back of my head. As of recently, within the last year or so, as many people have, I've rediscovered Objective-C. Anybody here played with Objective-C before? That's what I thought. The interest here was, one of the interesting semantics of Objective-C is the whole message passing, the whole message dispatch nature of the language. And the thought was, is there some way to take some of the semantics of Objective-C's message passing and combine it with what we've got in the C# or the Java language? Now, I have no idea if this is a good idea or not. That's going to be the first question I'm going to ask, is what do you guys think? Is this a good idea? The second question is, assuming it is, and assuming it's worth trying to pursue, what would, let's flesh out the language. Now, bear in mind, this is not a design by committee kind of scenario. Right? You guys can make suggestions and I can decide whether or not those are good suggestions, right? This is still firmly a dictatorship. And in grand Microsoft tradition, I don't promise that this will ever ship. So, what I want to do, first of all, those of you who are familiar with Objective-C, pardon for just a second. Those of you who are not, I want to give a real, very, very high-level overview. And by the way, in the spirit of this conference, this is Microsoft's new lightweight PowerPoint environment. Visual Power and Pad. So essentially, inside of Objective-C, recall originally Objective-C was the other branch of object-oriented programming languages. We had C++, and I think everybody in this room knows that. Over on the other side, Brad Cox decided, what if I took sort of a small talk approach to objects? So that, for example, if I have a person pointer, when I create one, instead of new person in the C# or the C++ family of approach, instead I start sending messages. These are dynamically bound. These are late bound. It feels somewhat, apropos to be following Mads talking about dynamic and all the, crazy things he's doing with that language. No offense, Anders. To turn around and look at this from the other side, in Smalltalk, whenever we did what we would today consider to be a method invocation, it was actually a message that was dispatched. So that I would say something along the lines of person, alloc, init, and I have my font set way too big for this to work effectively, but you get the basic idea. The square brackets here were effectively indications of a message dispatch taking place. And this here was the actual message being dispatched. You could think of that as the method invocation. And if there were any parameters, they would be specified after that using what to those of us in the C family of languages consider to be a fairly strange syntax. Like so. Howdy, last name, duty. Anybody remember that show? Okay, maybe I'm just old. Point is, these parameters basically get bundled up into a message and then dispatched. Under the hood, what's actually happening here is that the Objective-C originally was a precompiler. This got turned into a sequence of C-based APIs that would do what we consider today to be reflective bound invocation. It would go look on that object at runtime, determine whether or not it supported that particular message, and if it did, dispatch it. If it didn't, well, typical error semantics, something would happen, exception would be thrown, et cetera, et cetera. First question that I would ask of the room, and I intend this to be a fairly open-ended discussion, so I will try to repeat for the recording as best as possible people's comments, but please, I'm more interested in what you have to say than I am in capturing all of this for posterity. Does this seem like a good idea? I mean, with all the discussion of dynamic languages and so forth, does this seem like an appropriate preprocessor, because that's the way I would choose to implement it, not to try to change the semantics of C# directly, but to implement it on top of the existing C# language? Does this seem like a good idea?
Well, I have a question. How is that any better or even different from what Anders talked about with the dynamic?
How is this any better or different than what Anders talked about with dynamic? Answer, I don't know precisely. And so maybe the answer is there's nothing worth exploring here. In the traditions of Objective-C and Smalltalk, one of the things that we can do is we can capture any message that's never been handled. So this is very similar to Ruby's method missing and so forth kind of capability. Now, I don't know, Anders, is that something that you have method missing in dynamic?
Yes. You can implement iDynamic object. And then
You can implement, so you'd have to implement the iDynamic interface, iDynamic object interface in order to make that happen?
Right. On whatever object you're dispatching to, if it implements iDynamic object, then you get to handle the dispatch, and you can do whatever you want to do if you don't find a method.
So in other words, you've basically rendered my talk obsolete?
I haven't seen the rest
No,
of
no,
it.
it's okay if the answer is yes.
We're on track.
You're sort of, Anders is frantically making notes, right? You know, must render this language obsolete. And that's fine. I mean, I don't, again, this was something that sort of was floating in the back of my head last year. So, for next year, can you tell me what you guys are going to be working on so I don't do this again? I mean, are there interesting, sir?
Well, as I understood it, one
As you understood it.
Cox's principle, fundamental principles is that every Objective-C every C program, every valid C program is a valid Objective-C program. So that
Right.
would be
Let me repeat real quick.
backward compatibility.
Right. One of Cox's principles was backwards compatibility. Every C program is a valid Objective-C program. And, in some level, this would be true here too, right? If you give me a traditional C# program, it passes through the C# preprocessor and we're done. What I was imagining, quite frankly, in an Objective-C scenario would be something like, person P equals new person, traditional C#, but now if I want to do a message dispatch, it would be like the bang syntax or something similar. If I see this turns into a message dispatch.
I guess my point or thought would be that I don't think that's, I would think that might be the justification for an Objective-C# if backwards compatibility was in any way compromised as the C# language.
So in other words, if Anders somehow screws up C#4, we want this as a
billion lines of C# can't be wrong.
billion lines of C#. Are you going to screw up C#4? Should I start working on this? We're going to be okay. Go ahead.
Nobody that I know was doing anything with Objective-C until that became the only platform to write the app,
Right.
the iPhone.
Right.
So,
Nobody cares about Objective-C. Why are we bothering with this?
kind of.
Yeah. Because it was an interesting intellectual exercise, right? Yeah, 5,000 iPhone app developers can't be wrong, right? Sir?
Well, for that reason, I think it'd be interesting to see this written to target the DLR. Because Silverlight has support for dynamic languages now, that would be a great way to kind of woo Apple developers who are used to writing code in Objective-C and getting them to write code for Silverlight.
So in further grand Microsoft tradition, write a language to try to steal developers from another programming language.
I mean, it has merits of
Would you like a job here? Sir, you had a comment.
Oh, so I was just going to say that I think you can now use ahead-of-time compilation with Mono to write applications for the iPhone anyway. So you can now go and use C# on the iPhone.
You can use C# on the iPhone,
Okay.
and soon you'll be able to write Ruby on the iPhone. And I think all the Mac developers will do that.
Okay. All right. So there's a couple of votes that we don't think this is necessary. Sir, and then in the back.
So far, what I have seen compared to dynamic previous presentation is different syntax.
Mm-hmm.
But from what I know, from what I heard about Smalltalk, its fans, its devoted people, they say that there are some things in this message passing that give it enormous power. I don't know what is this. So probably we should talk about this. What exactly this gives semantically compared
The message dispatch approach, the comment was the Smalltalk fans of the world have always said that the message dispatch provides tremendous power. And I certainly don't count myself as one of the Smalltalk zealots of the world. So if there is a few in the room, please keep me honest. But one of the things that I know, for example, that Smalltalk devotees always liked the fact was, I can at any point, the interception of messages, the transmutation of messages was possible in order to do, redispatch of methods, redispatch of messages, etc. It was a very consistent style of dispatch. And because of that, it was easier to manipulate some of these things. In many respects, I've heard people argue that this notion of message passing is, in a very, very strange sort of way, intrinsically restful in nature. And of course, rest right now is really hot, and so therefore it must be good. So, in the back, and then I'll get to you, Eric. Just hang on.
So, the syntactic issues of Objective-C, I think it can be debated back and forth. There are
Right.
benefits to self-documenting by having all the parameters named and so forth, but it is unusual in a C-like context.
Right.
The big benefit that I think Objective-C has over the .NET object model is the ability to add dynamically dispatched methods to classes you didn't write.
Mm-hmm. The ability to add dynamically dispatched methods.
Like add a visitor pattern to something that didn't support visitor, you can just add a method to the classes you're interested in.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that
Yeah. Well, and fundamentally, right?
basically Objective-C category.
If the dispatch logic here were opened up, right, such that anybody could hook and introduce their own, I mean, imagine it as a simple table of names and dispatch receivers, right? Then anybody can at some point come along and plug in a new receiver to this object P, and thus essentially, in a dynamic fashion, extend the object in a similar sense to extension methods, but without the ahead of time, the static type safety, et cetera. I mean, that's...
Yeah, it basically has, Objective-C has extension methods, except that they are runtime dispatched instead of statically dispatched.
Right. Right. Sir?
I think there's a few other things this could bring to the platform, like Objective-C has some features that aren't really related to Smalltalk, at least not as far as I know, like protocols, kind of like interfaces, except they can be used in duck type. Something doesn't have to implement a
Right.
protocol.
Right. Protocols mentioned. I should probably just wander around and hold the mic out to people. Here, say that again.
Some of the features in Objective-C, like protocols, they're not part of Smalltalk, but I think they would be a valuable addition to the platform. Protocols are kind of like interfaces, but they don't have to be explicitly implemented. They can be used sort of like with duck typing. This class happens to implement methods with these names and these signatures, therefore it can be it implements this protocol.
If it walks like a duck, talks like a duck. Yeah. I'm getting waved at by Jimmy. What's up?
So we need to get the next speaker.
We need to get the next speaker. Okay. All right. So, final vote. Is this worth exploring? Kind of a meh. Eric says it's not Haskell, therefore it ain't worth shit. Anyway, thank you for your time.